at a packed Hong Kong fight hall in Kowloon on a Sunday afternoon in 1972. Bruce Lee walked in first with Chuck Norris half a step behind him. Inside, 1,200 people had their eyes locked on the boxing ring in the center of the hall, where Bolo Yeung was picking apart another martial artist with his signature kung fu. Bolo threw a heavy forearm. The man across from him, a martial artist named Lam, blocked it cleanly. But Bolo's other hand had already come around underneath, and the hook landed flat against Lam's ribs, hard enough that the sound carried to the back of the room. Lam staggered. The crowd didn't cheer. They gasped, the way a room full of trained fighters gasps when they have just watched a clean strike land. Nobody in that fight hall knew they were about to witness history. They did not know that the man in the boxing ring was about to call Chuck Norris out in front of 1,200 people. Bolo Yeung was nicknamed the Chinese Hercules. He was 26 years old, the bodybuilding champion of Hong Kong, and a rising star at the biggest film studio in the city. By every measurable standard that afternoon, he was the most physically intimidating man in the building. What happened in the 11 seconds that followed would change the way an entire generation of Hong Kong fighters thought about real combat. Bruce and Chuck slid into the two seats the Federation organizers had been holding in the VIP row along the side wall. Bruce was in a dark turtleneck. Chuck was in a plain navy windbreaker and jeans, with a cap pulled low across his face. He looked like he could have been a tourist who had wandered in by accident. The press from New Martial, Hero Magazine, and Real Kung Fu were in the front row, and the senior sifus from every major Kowloon school filled the rows around them. Cigarette smoke layered against the high ceiling like a second roof. This was the Hong Kong Martial Arts Federation's autumn interschool demonstration, the one event of the year that brought Hungar, Wing Chun, Choi Li Fut, and Northern Praying Mantis into the same room, and the American in the cap had not been on the invitation list. Chuck watched Bolo work. The hooks were coming from the hip and not from the shoulder. The footwork was heavy but exact, and the horse stance was the kind of horse stance that takes a decade of conditioning to build. Chuck leaned forward an inch in his seat. Bruce noticed the lean and did not say anything. Lam stepped off the floor, breathing hard, and a second partner stepped on to replace him. His name was Chen, and he was 5'10" and 180 pounds, a Choi Li Fut stylist brought in from a rival school to make the demonstration a true cross-style exhibition. Chen was faster than Lam, lighter on his feet and harder to catch, and Bolo adjusted. For the next 90 seconds, the audience watched Bolo hunt him across the floor. Chen threw the long Choi Li Fut chains, the rolling hand combinations the style is famous for, and Bolo absorbed them on his forearms and walked through them. When Chen finally committed to a high kick, Bolo caught the leg, swept the planted foot, and Chen landed flat on his back on the wooden floor with a slap that was the loudest thing in the building for half a second. Chen got up slowly. Bolo nodded to him. Chen nodded back. Real work between real practitioners. The crowd applauded. It was not polite applause. It was the applause that comes from people who know what they are looking at. The press in the front row was already taking notes. Bruce was nodding from the VIP row. Chuck had not moved. The Federation chairman walked onto the floor with the microphone. His name was Ho, and he was a small Wing Chun Sifu in his 60s. He thanked Bolo. He thanked the partners. He began to introduce the next school's demonstration. Bolo, still standing on the floor, oiled with sweat, raised one hand. He said something in Cantonese to the chairman. The chairman hesitated. Bolo extended his hand for the microphone. Hope gave it to him. Bolo spoke first in Cantonese. The crowd laughed. It was appreciative laughter, the laughter of a Hong Kong crowd that loved its hometown hero. Then Bolo switched to broken English. The English alerted the crowd that the speech was now aimed at someone specific in the room. Heads started to turn, looking Bolo's target. He said he had heard that there was an American world champion in Hong Kong this week. He said American karate had been on the cover of magazines for years, and Chinese kung fu had not. He said he had watched some of the American tournaments on smuggled film. He said American karate was, and he used the Cantonese phrase first and then translated it into English, a game with the teacher watching. Touch karate. Light contact. The referee stops the fight before anyone gets hurt. In Hong Kong, he said, the referee is the ground. The referee is the hospital. The crowd was engaged now. Some laughter, some genuine agreement. The Federation chairman was gesturing for the microphone back. Bolo waved him off. He turned and he pointed to the VIP row. He said, in English, Mr. Bruce, you brought your friend, the American champion. Yes? 1,200 heads turned at once. Bruce Lee in the VIP row did not move. He did not say anything. The choice was Chuck's. Chuck turned to Bruce and said quietly, he has already lost. He just does not know it yet. Bruce nodded once. Chuck stood up. He removed the cap. He folded it once. He set it on the seat. He removed the windbreaker, folded it once, and set it on top of the cap. Underneath, he was wearing a plain white T-shirt. He kept the jeans. He kept the running shoes. He walked down the VIP row past the senior Sifus, who parted for him without being asked, and he stepped onto the demonstration floor. Recognition was starting in the press row. One photographer was already changing lenses. A second was whispering urgently to a third. The name moved through the crowd the way names move through crowds in a current. Chuck Norris, the American who had fought Bruce in the film, the American on the posters for Way of the Dragon that were going up all over Kowloon that month. Bolo's expression did not change. He had suspected. He had the microphone. He said, in English, slow enough that the crowd's English speakers could follow him. He said, you would not last 30 seconds in Hong Kong, Mr. Norris. Chuck reached the center of the floor. He stopped 8 feet from Bolo, and he said, in the calm, even tone of a man who had been in situations like this before in his life, let us find out. The Federation chairman, white-faced, took the microphone back. He announced what he had no choice but to announce, an unscheduled demonstration. 1 minute. Light contact only, no injury. He said the words the way a man says words he knows will not be obeyed. The crowd did not make a sound. Bolo moved first. He charged with the wide southern Hungar stance, arms loaded for the bridge strike that had broken Lamb's ribs 2 minutes earlier. He was committed forward, 218 pounds of muscle moving at full speed. Chuck pivoted 45 degrees to his own left. He let the bull pass the line he had been standing on. As Bolo's lead shoulder went by him, Chuck's lead leg side kick, the kick he had won world championships with, landed flat against Bolo's outside thigh. Not damage. Calibrated, a kick that said, I could have ended you here. Bolo felt it. He reset harder than he had wanted to reset. The first sliver of confusion entered his face. The noise in the fight hall dropped. 3 seconds had passed. Bolo threw the southern hook, the technique that had put Lamb against the wall. Coming from the hip with full body torque, Chuck slipped it. He did not block it. He did not parry it. He slipped it. His head moved 4 inches. The hook passed through the air where his jaw had been a moment earlier. As the hook continued past him, Bolo's torso was over-rotated, and his lead-leg knee was exposed. Chuck did not strike it. He stepped back. He reset. The message landed without contact. The next one was not going to be air. What the senior practitioners in the building were seeing was something that takes a decade of training to see clearly. A fight is not two men hitting each other. A fight is a negotiation about distance. Every style on the floor that afternoon made an assumption about where the fight would happen. Hung Gar assumed it would happen close, where the southern hook and the bridge strike could land with the full torque of the horse stance behind them. Chuck Norris had spent 20 years of his life learning to own the exact half-step of distance that sits outside Hung Gar range. The 1,200 people in the fight hall were watching a man who owned that gap, demonstrating what owning it looked like against a man who needed the gap to close in order for anything he knew to function. Bolo could not get close. He had never in his life met an opponent who could keep him outside, and he did not yet have the vocabulary to describe what was happening to him. He fell back on what had worked in every real Hong Kong street fight he had ever been in. The double hand grab, close the distance, get hands on the opponent. He lunged. Chuck stepped inside the lunge. Not back, inside. Bolo's grab closed on the air over Chuck's shoulder. Chuck's right hand came up, palm open, and the palm landed light against Bolo's exposed throat. Just placement, no force. Held for one count, 1,200 trained practitioners in a Kowloon fight hall watched the open palm rest against the throat of a man with a 48-inch chest. They understood simultaneously what they were looking at. The piece of Bolo Yeung that all of his muscle could not protect was being touched by a man who had spent 20 years of his life learning where to touch it. Chuck held the palm there for one count. Then he dropped it. He stepped back. His hands hung at his sides. Total elapsed time, 11 seconds. In the VIP row, Bruce Lee, who had not moved the whole time, lifted his glass of tea and took a quiet sip. The audience did not make a sound for 3 full seconds. Then the senior Hung Gar Sifu in the front row stood up. He started to applaud. The Wing Chun Sifu next to him stood up. He started to applaud. The press row stood up. Row by row, 1,200 people in a Kowloon fight hall stood up and applauded the American who had walked in through the side door with Bruce Lee 15 minutes earlier and whom none of them had recognized when he had arrived. Bolo stood in the center of the floor, breathing hard. The microphone was still in his hand. He looked at it for a moment like he did not remember picking it up. Then he walked the 8 feet across the floor to Chuck. He put the microphone into Chuck's hand. He bowed. It was a real bow, not a martial arts ritual bow. The bow that a fighter gives another fighter when something has been settled between them that does not need to be said out loud. Chuck handed the microphone back to the Federation chairman without speaking into it. He picked up his windbreaker and his cap from the VIP seat. He sat down next to Bruce. Bruce passed him the cup of tea. Chuck took a sip and handed it back. The demonstration continued. The next school came onto the floor. The Northern Praying Mantis demonstrator did his 10 minutes. The crowd watched politely, but every person in the building knew the demonstration was already over. Whatever happened for the next 2 hours was going to be a postscript to something else. That night, 3 men sat at a corner table in a restaurant on Nathan Road. Bruce Lee, Chuck Norris, Bolo Yeung. They ate. They drank. Bolo asked Chuck questions about American tournament rules, about the point system, about the way American referees decided what counted as a clean strike. Chuck asked Bolo questions about Hung Gar bridge work, about how the southern hook generated its torque from the horse stance, about what 12 years of horse stance conditioning did to a man's legs. Bruce sat between them and translated when the English ran out. At one point, Bolo asked Chuck, through Bruce, the question he had not been able to ask on the floor of the fight hall. He asked what Chuck had been looking at during the 11 seconds. Chuck thought for a moment. He said through Bruce that he had not been looking at the muscle, and he had not been looking at the hands, and he had not been looking at the feet. He had been looking at Bolo's eyes because the eyes told him where the next strike was going half a second before the body did, and half a second was the only thing he had needed. Bolo did not say anything for a long time. Then he picked up his glass and drank. Later that night, Bolo asked Bruce why he had brought Chuck to the demonstration without telling anyone he was coming. Bruce smiled. He said he had wanted to see what would happen. He said he had a feeling Bolo would take the microphone, because Bolo always took the microphone, and he had wanted Bolo to take it in front of someone who could answer him without breaking him. He said the thing that needed to happen had happened, and that the three of them at the table were better for it. Bolo thought about that for a long time. Then he laughed for the first time since the fight hall. The three men talked until the restaurant closed. 8 months later, Bruce Lee was gone. He was 32 years old. The world received the news the way the world receives news like that, which is in waves of disbelief that take weeks to settle into something quieter. The funeral was held in Hong Kong in late July of 1973. Bolo Yeung was there, so was Chuck Norris, who had flown in from Los Angeles. They sat 2 pews apart in a small chapel in Kowloon. They nodded to each other across the gap. Neither of them spoke about that Sunday afternoon in Hong Kong 9 months earlier. There was nothing left to say about it that the silence between them did not already say better. In the years that followed, Bolo Yeung became an international film star. He played the villain Bolo in Enter the Dragon, the film Bruce had been making when he died. He went on to make the Van Damme films and 60 more Hong Kong pictures across 4 decades. He was asked about Bruce Lee in every interview he gave for the rest of his life. He answered the questions about Bruce with great patience and warmth and a kind of permanent, quiet sadness. He was never asked about Chuck Norris because the press did not know to ask. The men who had been in the Kowloon Fight Hall that October afternoon did not give interviews. They did not write memoirs. They told the story in gyms in Tsim Sha Tsui and Mongkok and Wan Chai to younger fighters who they trusted to understand the point of the story. New Martial Hero ran 4 photographs of the demonstration the following week. Chuck Norris was asked about the trip to Hong Kong many times in the decades that followed. He always answered the same way. He said it had been a wonderful experience. He said Bruce had been a generous host. He said he had met some remarkable martial artists there. When he was asked about Bolo Yeung, he would smile slightly and say that Bolo had been a fine fighter and a fine man, and that they had stayed in touch over the years. He never told the story of the demonstration. The story belonged to the 1,200 people who had been in the fight hall that afternoon, and to Bolo and to Bruce, who was no longer alive to be asked, and Chuck did not feel it was his story to tell on his own. Bolo Yeung was asked about it once at a martial arts gathering in Hong Kong many years later by a younger fighter who had heard the story from his grandfather. Bolo thought about the question for a long time before he answered it. He said, in the slow, careful English he used when he wanted his answer to be remembered exactly, that Chuck Norris had shown him something that afternoon that he had needed to learn. He said that he had been young and strong and proud, and that those 3 things together can build a man up into a place where he stops seeing the man across from him properly. He said that Chuck had given him back the ability to see what was in front of him. He said that this was a gift, and that not every fighter in the world receives a gift like that from someone with the patience and the skill to give it the right way. He said that he had been grateful for it every day since. The younger fighter had nodded. He had not pressed for more. There had not needed to be more. What had happened in the fight hall that afternoon was a small thing by any conventional measure. 11 seconds of contact between two men in front of 1,000 or so witnesses in a community building at an inter-school demonstration that nobody outside Hong Kong had any reason to remember. By the larger measure that matters inside the martial arts community, where the question of what real fighting is and what real fighting is not is the question that organizes everything else. It was the kind of moment that becomes a teaching story. A teaching story is the thing that a martial arts community uses to pass down its truths from the men who have understood them to the younger men who have not understood them yet. Thank you for watching, and make sure to check out our new Chuck Norris book about his true stories from the sets of his beloved movies. As longtime Chuck Norris fans ourselves, we put this book together to bring the true behind-the-scenes stories from his movie and television career into one place. Get your copy by scanning the QR code on the screen or visit the link in my description. Most of these stories have never been gathered in a single book, and some have only ever appeared in an old magazine interview or a passing line in someone else's memoir. From Bruce Lee and the early martial arts films to Cannon, Lone Wolf McQuade, Walker, Texas Ranger, and beyond. This is a celebration of his career and the moments that never made it into the films, but say more about the man than anything that did. A must-have for every Chuck Norris fan, and the perfect gift for anyone who grew up on his movies. After you read it, let us know which behind-the-scenes moment was your favorite.